Eben, welcome.
Hey, brother. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so there's going to be a number of people listening to this that are going to recognize the name. And people listening to the show know that I'm a diehard Bears fan, so I'm a little bit giddy right now. But before we get into your sports career, uh, I know that we're going to go all over the map today. But one of our mutual friends, Len May, uh, seeded me with a question. And I wanted to just get a sense from, growing up, your mom played a particular role in your life, as all moms do. And I just want to understand just sort of how she helped you develop into the individual that you are today.
Mm, it's a great place to start. She brought me into this world, so I
Yeah,
guess
I
it's
guess
fitting.
that's the the big thing.
um, when I start talking about who I am now, how I think about the world, whether that relates to cannabis advocacy or my life in football or my thoughts on the pharmaceutical paradigm that most of the football world functions under, I always start with the fact that I was raised by two very holistically minded people. My mother is, for lack of a better term, she's a witch. She's a yogi. She's a mystic, and she comes from a long line of witches, yogis, mystics. And my dad is as well. My dad is a lifetime athlete. He is not a yogi per se, but he's very much a shaman, unbeknownst to him. And their way of looking at the world was always food is medicine, exercise to take care of yourself, drink plenty of water, use whatever natural means are available before going to a doctor to be prescribed something,
Mhm.
some medication or whatever it might be. And that very much influenced my athletic career and my life as an athlete and how I thought about taking care of myself. Now, coupling that with the actual practical techniques that began to infuse my athletic career when I started playing football at the age of 13, it was almost simultaneous that my mom started taking my brother and I to yoga classes.
Mhm.
And as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid, I got a lot out of it. I didn't always love it, but I really appreciated it. And it was this, like, the first yoga class. I was born in New York City, lived in Brooklyn till I was 10. My mom moved my brother and I out here to Los Angeles when I was about 10 years old. The first yoga class I went to might have been even before I started playing football, actually, but it
Mhm.
was in this really dark church room, at this church off Hollywood and Highland.
Wow.
And it was with the yoga instructor was this guy Rudy Mattia, who's a ex special forces turned yogi. And immediately it like clicked that this was a warrior's practice. And it
Mhm.
was super hard. It was super challenging. I really loved how Rudy took us through this thing because he turned this seemingly, in my young mind, this sort of feminine art. He
Mhm.
made it really masculine and warrior oriented.
Mhm.
So I always had that foundation. And as I started to play football, and yoga really became a part of I was lucky. My mom has, that's a whole podcast in itself. My mom is a incredibly intuitive master healer, body worker. She works with some very elite level people to help them deal with all sorts of things, physical, emotional trauma, releasing them from it. And her practice is very somatically oriented. So the emotional body and the physical body are blended into one, in this physical vehicle that we transport ourselves in around throughout our lifetime, it carries all the emotional trauma that we take on and we pick up throughout our lives, and it gets locked in our muscles and our joints and all kinds of things, and it manifests itself in all different ways. And that's really her forte, and that was so important during my football career, playing this sport where I endured immense amounts of physical damage and trauma. um, but because of the foundation of yoga and this holistically oriented philosophy about how to take care of yourself as an athlete, first of all, I had an incredible sense of the body and how it works. I remember I had these massive growth spurts when
Mhm.
I was a kid, and my back would just go out. 13 years old, back would go out.
Wow.
I wouldn't be able to walk. And
Hmm.
it was really because my body was growing so fast. I think from like sixth grade to eighth grade, I grew a foot in about 18 months.
Wow.
And my body was just in utter turmoil. I couldn't walk through a doorway without banging both shoulders on the way through. I could barely chew gum and walk down the sidewalk, as they say.
Hmm.
Um, but so she always just like she would say, okay, my back would go out. She'd say, Eb, get on the floor, do these exercises. And within 10 minutes, I'd get up and the pain would be gone. My back would be reset. And this is just a microcosm of her grand understanding of how the human body works. And it really was a blessing for me during my football career, because I started dealing with subluxation in my shoulders and back, herniated discs, and all kinds of things started happening, because this is what happens when you play football. And I always knew how to remedy it, whether it was exercises, stretches, yoga postures, whatever it might be. There was this very fundamental, intuitive understanding of how the body moves and functions kinesiologically. And my mom was really the foundation of that. So all of that to say, the things that my mom had me doing when I was 13 years old and starting off on my football career made me super resilient and gave me my body this durability that carried me really all the way through until my NFL career.
Hmm.
And I feel really blessed to have had her and these parents. My dad has a morning routine that he's 63 and he's done his core work, his stretching, his running, and his 200 push-ups every day since I've known him. And
Wow.
this was really fundamental in my development as a young athlete.
What made you decide football was the path for you at the age of 13? Because I know growing up, there are times where, I was offered, and I think I did play football before then, but at the age of 13, what made you decide, like, hey, this is it for me?
Well, it really started when I was about 7 or 8, and I was at my grandparents' house, and my parents got divorced when I was 7. There was a lot of darkness in my childhood, a lot of alcoholism, substance abuse, physical and emotional abuse. Um, and part of that was my brother and I, we'd go spend entire summers up in Connecticut with my grandparents. And up there, in the area also lived my dad's 3 brothers, my 3 uncles, who I equate to being saints, because they really were the saviors of my brother and I during our a really dark childhood. And
Hmm.
we would basically just go play sports all day, every day. We'd go to the park, we'd shoot hoops, we'd throw the football around, we'd hit baseballs. We did it all. I mean, my my uncle Rob, he would say, "You guys are going to OD on sports." It was pretty funny. It was always the running joke. And so I had this like, so just to kind of backtrack a little bit, I had this really beautiful blend of artists and athletes in my family, and it was a really synergistic, wonderful way to grow up. Aside from the darkness. Um, Now, that being said, so I was about 7 or 8 years old, and it was summertime at my grandparents' house in Connecticut, and I'm watching the news, and up pops a segment on the Jets and the Giants in training camp.
Hmm.
And I saw it, and immediately I just thought, my God, that's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be one of those warriors. I want to be one of those gladiators on the gridiron. I
Hmm.
saw them in their pads and their helmets, and they looked fucking heroic. And somehow it just planted this perfect seed in my psyche of this was my way out of the darkness.
Hmm.
And football really, and so my mom would never let me play. She was like, "You're going to get hurt. It's too dangerous." Finally, my freshman year of high school, so 6 years later, 6 or 7 years later, finally, I convince her with the help of my dad to let me play my freshman year of high school.
Hmm.
And from that moment on, really from the first moment I stepped on the football field, I was surrounded by a lot of great people, these coaches who said, "Eb, if you work really hard and you give it everything you got, you're physically gifted. You could play on Sundays, you could buy your mom a house, you could do all those things that you've ever dreamed of." And so I really started this process. Looking back, it was the process of visualization and manifestation, because I held this image of myself in my mind's eye of the NFL warrior that I would one day become.
Hmm.
And everything I did, how I carried myself, how I trained, how I ate, how I lived, was all in alignment of reaching the top of this mountain, which was playing in the NFL. And then coupling that with some great parents who believed in me and had this athletic know-how to give me the structure underneath all of the sort of God-given ability, and then my mindset.
Hmm.
And then football became a vehicle of therapy for me. You
Hmm.
know, it became a vehicle for me to get all of this rage that I had from being a scared little kid. I got to put it out there on the field. I got to be really violent. That was always the token of my game. That's how I got to the NFL. I was super physical, and I was celebrated for it, and I climbed this ladder of success, and football really was this way for me to express all of this shit that was happening inside of me at that time.
That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that. It's something that just really resonates with me because my mother was a yoga teacher. My dad was in finance. He had
Mm,
a slightly different background, but it's just, she was by no means a mystic, but I could see how, that sports being a way to unleash, that really resonates. Now,
mm,
Eben, there is something about the particular position that you went into the NFL. And I've watched a few documentaries on this about people training to go onto the line. And, when they go into high school, they put on enormous amounts of weight. And there's so few people that make it to college and then again to the NFL. And as a result, they end up with lots of health issues just because of being so large or just putting on so much weight.
mhm,
Now, for you, you were able to make it to that 1/10 of 1% or whatever the probability is. Now, was it the mindset, the image in the mind's eye that separated you from the rest, or what were you doing in this sort of leading up to getting in the NFL and even in the NFL to push yourself above the rest?
mm. It's a great question. Um, it was really, like I said, I was really blessed to be surrounded by people who really understood nutrition, the importance of food. So my eating was always really dialed in. I
Mhm.
was always super lean for my position. Yes, I would be 310 pounds, but I was only 18% body fat.
Wow.
I was super lean, super strong. Training was of the utmost importance. Not only did throughout high school did I train with the team, but my mom also hooked me up with a personal trainer and we were doing yoga. So I was getting 360 attention, training, practice at being the best football player I could possibly be. Um, in college, going to a Division I school, I played at the University of Arizona. We had an elite level strength and conditioning program. So the sort of exterior stuff sort of fell away. I did practice a little bit of yoga still then. But as I got bigger and my body started to fill out, yoga really started to hurt and I started to hate it. So towards really when I got to the NFL, I did yoga only a few times my first couple years, and these injuries started to pile up. And I think, there's definitely a correlation there between not doing the necessary recovery work and the injuries starting to pile up as my career went on. But so it was a, it was a confluence of events and circumstances and uh genetics. I was physically gifted, I would say. My dad is 6'6", 200 pounds built. He was a basketball player. My mom is 5'2", about 120 pounds, but she's built like a gymnast
Hmm.
and like broad shoulders, really strong body. And I got the height of my dad and I got the physicality of my mom, which gave me a great framework, physical framework to play the position of offensive line. Coupling that with really good nutrition, like very little sugar. I mean, my mom would send me to school with fucking Tupperwares with chicken breasts and brown rice and broccoli,
Hmm.
and as much as I detested that at times and just wanted a slice of pizza, like I ate it because that's what I had. And I had this, between my parents, my trainers, my football coaches, I just had this little voice in my head that was like, Eb, this is the food, this is the fuel you need to eat. And food is always I've always had this relationship with food where it's more about the fuel than it is about the mouth pleasure,
Hmm.
which served me very well throughout my football career. Now, down the line towards the end of my NFL career, when shit started falling apart and my body wasn't doing what it used to do, I started to put on a lot of weight. I got out of shape, really. I mean, by the end of my time in Chicago, I was 330 pounds.
Hmm.
And that had to do with a lot of good Italian food in Chicago
Of
and
course.
trying to, numb the pain through food. Um, and alcohol to be completely honest.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't, for 90% of my football career, my ability to stay healthy and my ability to just endure the trauma and to continue climbing that ladder had much to do with all those little things, the cliche things: eating right, taking really good care of my body. I got weekly massages. I was always getting in the ice tub, doing everything I could to keep my body flushing all of those toxins and all of that stuff that builds up through the trauma of football.
Yeah. So you mentioned something earlier, and I want to get into
I'll
the
say
NF.
that, sorry,
Go.
Boomer. One
No, go.
last thing is I fucking loved it. I
Yeah.
just loved it, And football is a really hard game.
Hmm.
And offensive line and defensive line, offensive line even more so, is
Yeah.
it's maybe the most difficult position to play because you never get the credit that you deserve, and
Hmm.
you're always getting the blame that you don't deserve.
Hmm.
So it's one of those positions where you really just have to. I just love the physical combat. Like
Hmm.
I got high on kicking the shit out of people and even getting my ass kicked, like I enjoyed that. And I've had really funny conversations with other former NFL veterans who say, Eb, what do you miss the most? And we all kind of simultaneously say, obviously, you miss the locker room and you miss the camaraderie and you miss
Yeah.
the tribe, but you miss the pain more than anything, because the pain
Mhm.
gave you this really twisted sense of purpose and belonging,
Yeah.
that doesn't really exist in the real world. So I would say that was kind of the love of the game, and just kind of this sick love for the violence of it is kind of the magic dust that makes it all work from that point.
I've got goosebumps when you say that. I was never big enough to be an NFL player, and it's just kind of very interesting to hear you go through that and see how somebody can make it to such an elite level. Now, the question on my mind and everybody's mind when it comes to your NFL career, of the teams you play for, which one did you enjoy most, if you're allowed to say? And then was there any particular person that you enjoyed facing off against, either because they pushed you to another level or it was just a challenge, or you got those goosebumps that you just alluded to when it came to the pain aspect of it?
Hmm. um I liked Jacksonville, but it's a tough organization to play for. There's a culture and energy are very real things in the NFL, and how and in this and have a very real impact on the success of all NFL teams. Football is the ultimate team game, and it's also the ultimate energy game.
Hmm.
Um, and in Jacksonville, it always felt like we were up against ourselves. It seemed there's this sort of undertone moving through everyone in the locker room, and really kind of the entire organization of, we all wish we were somewhere else,
Hmm.
which makes it really difficult to be successful.
Yeah.
And especially, football is a tough game. Like I said, it's even tougher when you're not winning. And we had my first couple years in Jacksonville, we had some really competitive, tough teams. Um, we were very competitive and a very tough team. But it really sort of started to fall apart, and it's all top down. It starts with the owner, and the energy of the owner trickles down into the front office, and the energy of the front office trickles down in the coaching staff, and the coaching staff energy trickles down in the players. And that is the soup that makes up whether a team is able to win games and make the playoffs and go to the Super Bowl. I, unfortunately, over my 6-year career, we never made the playoffs. It was kind of my cross to bear throughout my football career, of being on these football teams that just could never really seem to get over the hump. The best team I ever played on was my last year at Arizona. We went 8-5, and we beat BYU in the Las Vegas Bowl, which was a magical year. Um, so that being said, I really loved playing in Chicago. The city loves its sports teams. What I appreciated so much, I had such a great appreciation for the fans of Chicago, um, and how they treated their athletes and really loved them. And it wasn't this sort of fanatical worship. It was a real appreciation for the guys, which I loved. I love that city, that organization. It's one of the oldest. Um, I mean, George Hallis started the NFL.
Yeah.
He's one of the icons that really built the entire league, and it was a special team to play for. We had my first year there, we had a record-setting offense. We're one game away from winning the NFC North. God damn you, Aaron Rodgers. In the last game of the year,
I
we
remember that.
lost to the Packers. It was a heartbreaker. But that was really a special team. There was a lot of good things that happened that year.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess the long story short is, while I love the Jags and they'll always have a special place in my heart because they took a chance on me to draft me 39th overall in the second round of the 2009 NFL draft, I really loved playing for the Bears, and that experience in Chicago gave me the sense of completion that I sort of needed in my football career. Um, that being said, the players every week, you're going up against fire breathing dragons, just absolute freaks of nature. My great rival during my time in Jacksonville was Robert Mathis, who's the defensive end of the Colts. He was opposite Dwight Freeney, and he was just, an all pro, unbelievable player, probably future Hall of Famer. Um, who could do it all. He could bull rush you, and bull rush you to the ground and step on your chest on his way to sacking the quarterback. And he had a spin move it was as if he teleported around you. And I always just felt like I brought my A game and never gave a sack up to him. So that was always a special game to play against him because you knew you were going up against the best there is.
Amazing. Uh, So let's talk about the injuries because the injuries came, and there's something you alluded to about the way the NFL traditionally looks at industry, or sorry, not industries, injuries,
Hmm.
uh, and how they're dealt with. And perhaps I would just love to hear, from your experience, what were some of the things that you went through to the extent you're able to share, and then how did you take a different approach to it?
Yeah. Um, so the I was super lucky up until the NFL. I didn't sustain many injuries. Um, Throughout that being said, though, throughout my football career from the time I was a sophomore in high school, my right shoulder would subluxate at least once a season, where it'd pop in and out of the socket. And it was excruciatingly painful, but it would never fully dislocate. Um, and given the foundation that I talked about earlier, I always had a really strong protocol of how to get my shoulder back into shape, tighten up all those little muscles that keep it tight and secure. And I had a really good regimen for dealing with that. And I would never miss a game until finally in my NFL career, it was my second year. The first severe injury I really sustained was actually not even it didn't even happen in a game. It happened in the weight room going into my second training camp in 2010. I had had a great off season, a great spring. Coaches are like, Eb, you're the fucking golden child. You just really kicked ass this off season. We can tell how hard you've been working. I was in incredible shape. And it was 2 weeks before training camp, and we're in the weight room and we're doing these like air squats on this Kaiser machine.
Mhm,
And I've got like, 1,000 pounds of air pressure on this thing, and we're doing these explosive squats, like drop down and explode up.
mhm.
And I got in there and I wasn't focused, and I dropped down and I feel this like tube of toothpaste squirt in my low back, and
Oh,
I just herniated my disc. I herniated L5S1. I didn't know what had happened. I came out of it and I felt like I'd had my body ripped in half and got put back on backwards. Maybe I was like, maybe I just tore my glute. Like, fuck, what happened? I don't, we went out to run sprints afterwards. I'm giving it everything I had. I tear my hamstring on top of that. Come
Jesus.
into the training room. They're treating me as if I just pulled my hamstring. I'm going, there's something else here. Finally, they figure out, okay, you herniated your disc. We'll do this, and this. I start going on, a super regimented core and stretching protocol, which really was not doing enough because it had created such severe sciatica that I would be just driving in my car. I'd have to pull over because I'd be blinded and with pain, and I couldn't feel my right foot on the ground. And then here comes training camp, and everybody's going, Eb, what the fuck happened, man? Like you just, what happened? And I'm like, herniated disc, man, So for basically 8 weeks of that season, I'm starting at right tackle. I'm coming into the facility at 5:30 in the morning to do this core and stretching routine to get my back just loosened up to a place where I could sit through meetings, popping these pharmaceutical grade prescription anti-inflammatories like Cataflam and Indocin to deal with the pain. Um, as the season progressed, I'm taking Vicodin before the game, after the game.
So you're
Um,
playing with a herniated disc.
yeah, and
Wow.
I can barely feel my right foot on the ground.
Wow.
Um, excruciating sciatica, doing everything I could. It's about week 6 or 7. We're in Kansas City playing the Chiefs, and it's midway through the second quarter, and I'm on a run play. It's run blocking. I'm punching up through the defensive end up to the outside linebacker. My legs get caught up in this pile. I go down, hit the ground with my arm at a right angle, and my shoulder dislocates. And I get up. I'm like, oh shit, my shoulder's completely out of the socket. I pop it back in, finish this drive, come out, come to the sideline, yell to the trainer, hey, I need a shoulder harness because I just dislocated my shoulder. It's fine. I got it popped back in. I just need a shoulder harness to tighten it down so I can get back out there because we're going to get the ball back and go out for a 2-minute drill. And he's looking at me. I love this guy, Justin. He was one of my saviors throughout my time there. And he's like looking at me like, what the fuck? And I go, hurry the fuck up, dude, because we're about
I'm
to go out for
thinking that
two
right now.
minutes. Yeah. I'm like, hurry up. So it was like a NASCAR like tire change. Throw my pads off, slap this shoulder harness on. By the time I get my pads and my jersey back on, we're running out onto the field for this 2-minute drill. Get out there. I'm in a pass protection. Second play of the 2-minute drive, I go to punch Mike Vrabel and my shoulder comes out of the socket again. And this time I can't get it back in because now it's in the harness. So I have to run off the field. I'm tapping my helmet. I run off the field. My backup comes in, and it takes the team doctors like 3 minutes to get my shoulder back into the socket. And they're like, they can't get it back in, and they're like pulling it and yanking it. And they're like, Ed, can we get you into the locker room? I'm like, fuck no, just get it in. Finally, it grinds back in. They take me into the locker room, give me some meds, probably some more Vicodin. I get a shower, take off my pads. And in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, I'll be fine for next week. I'll be ready for Dallas next week. I go out, watch the second half of the game on the sidelines in sweats. And it wasn't until after the game that the team doctor came up to me and said, Eb, you really dislocated your shoulder badly and you need surgery. You're done for the year. And I just totally broke down into tears because for the first time ever, I was told I couldn't play. And I'd never been told that ever. So I go, I have the shoulder surgery, but remember, my back is still a mess. I still
Yeah.
have this excruciating sciatic pain. Um, so I get my shoulder fixed. During this time, I really come to the realization that opiates have a really devastating impact on me. They make me super irritable. Um, like rage is just simmering under the surface, give me a really short fuse. I'm experiencing withdrawal symptoms after like 3 days of prescribed usage, waking up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning with shooting pains in my gut, cold sweats, chills, all of those things. My body just craving more of these pills. And really, they're not doing anything for the pain. Um, so that was, and here I am in a very vulnerable state. I can barely get dressed on my own. I need my mom and then my girlfriend to help me do all sorts of things. And um, I remember I would take these pills and they'd be helping me like tie my shoes, and I'd be getting pissed off at them, and I was like, whoa, this is not me. This is not who I am. And so through that experience, through the experience of really dealing with these injuries and having this sort of quiet time to really get to be confronted with what these opiates were doing to me, I realized by the end of my NFL career, I wasn't taking any more opiates, and I just really surrendered completely over to cannabis.
Hmm.
So through that process, coming from this holistically minded upbringing, like I said, cannabis was always in there because I realized during my college career, and it was much more difficult to navigate the drug testing protocols in college than it was in the NFL.
Yeah.
I realized that cannabis was this thing that when I consumed it, I would get a really good night's sleep. I felt decompressed emotionally and physically, and
Hmm.
I'd wake up the next day feeling rejuvenated and ready to go.
Hmm.
So I started applying that in my NFL career. And in the NFL, you only get tested for cannabis once. It's under their substance of abuse test, which happens once a year. And you get tested sometime between the first week of reporting back to the facility in the spring to about the first week of training camp. So you have like a 5 to 6 month window
So they
where,
telegraph the window for you.
yeah, basically.
Okay.
It's if you're paying attention, it's pretty easy to
Yeah.
navigate.
Yeah.
Um, so I understood that. And so cannabis during that time really became my go-to source of pain management because I realized the opiates are making me insane and not doing
Yeah.
anything for the pain. Meanwhile, I can come home and consume this cannabis. I can get a good night's sleep. I can decompress. I can connect with my loved ones and not feel insane. And I wake up the next day feeling rejuvenated.
Hmm.
So it very intuitively became my go to source of pain management. So after that shoulder injury, I'm done for the year. Back is still a mess. That off season is the lockout in 2011. The NFL owners locked out the players because we couldn't come to terms on a new collective bargaining agreement. So I actually went back to Arizona, finished my degree, did rehab on my shoulder with my old college athletic trainers, but my back is still a mess. It's not getting any better, maybe even getting worse. Finally, we come back to training camp in August. Collective bargaining agreement gets signed. Players come back. We start in training camp. My shoulder's better. My back is still a mess. I'd go in for 2 plays, had to come out because I couldn't feel my right leg. At this point, I'd done a number of epidural injections in my back, which did nothing.
Yeah.
Which, for anybody listening who's considering that, I would say don't waste your time.
Run and hide.
Um, yeah, because they literally did nothing. I had 3 of them. They're painful to have done, and really, I got no relief from it whatsoever. So finally, we're in training camp, going through this thing. I can't feel my right foot. I'm playing right tackle. It's a big deal.
Hmm.
I'm starting at right tackle, and my head coach, Jack Del Rio, who I love to death, he comes up to me, he says, Eb, man, we really need you this year, and I think it's best if you just go and have back surgery. It's a quick recovery. You can go and have it, and you'll be ready for the time season starts. And I think there's no sense in continuing to try to put these band-aids on this thing.
Hmm.
and I really appreciated that. Like maybe the next week, I went and had back surgery, flew up to North Carolina to see this guy, Dr. Brigham, who was one of the best back surgeons in the world. Went up, had this back surgery. Immediately, I felt relief. I woke up out of surgery and it was like my life had changed.
Hmm.
You know, it felt like somebody pulled the piece of glass out of the electrical circuit of my body. And all of this tension that I had built up over years of dealing with this herniated disc was just gone, you know, and I could have cried. It felt so good. Work my way back. I'm starting again by basically by week one. It was a quick recovery. I got really strong really fast, came back, was kicking ass, playing really hard, was having as good, if not better, of a season than my rookie year. And I had a really good rookie season. So I'm back, I'm playing well. Coaches are like, dude, you're having an all pro style year. Like this is who we know. We knew you had this, you know, this is who you are.
Hmm.
And so it's 11 weeks after surgery, probably about midway through the season again. And we're in Pittsburgh to play the Steelers. And I wake up in the hotel room and I can barely get out of bed because my back is seizing up.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh shit, you know, I don't know what's going on. I make my way to the team meal. I'm like, you know what? I'll be fine. I'll get this loosened up. I'll pop some pills. I'll be ready to roll by game time. Um, my back is super tight. It's in a total spasm. Get to the facility. Um, have my athletic trainer. He's putting stem and heat on it. He's using like the Theragun on it, doing every modality you could possibly think of to get my
Yeah.
back loosened up. By the end of it, he probably gave me 30 minutes to an hour of treatment. And I went to get off the table and I could barely get up
Yeah.
because my back was still seizing.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, I'll be fine. I go over to my locker, lie down on the ground to do some of these stretches that I've been doing since I was, 10 years old with my mom. And just nothing's going on. I'm looking up at the ceiling, and all of a sudden, the head coach, offensive coordinator, and my O line coach appear, and they go, Eb, you going to be all right? Can you go? And I'm like, yeah. And I couldn't get up off the ground. They're like, all right, Eb, you're done for the day. Uh,
Wow.
you're not going to play today. It's okay. I mean, I was in such a spasm. I thought, did I crack my hip? Do I have something broken in my body? Like, it didn't make sense.
Hmm.
So I didn't play that day. Coaches were like, hey, man, you've been working your ass off. Maybe we pushed it too hard over the last month. You know, maybe we're just going to give you a week off. Just rest, recover, let that thing get settled down. They put me on some sort of like steroid pack to I don't even looking back, I don't even know what the hell that was supposed to do. Um but and I feel like, throughout my upbringing and my life in football, which like I said, is so the recovery department is so heavily influenced by the pharmaceutical paradigm. Like I had a
Hmm.
pretty good understanding of chemicals and what they're supposed to do in the body. And looking back, I don't know what that steroid pack was supposed to do. Stimulate blood flow, activate the muscles in the area. I don't know. Um, so I take a week off.
Hmm.
And it's kind of getting better. It's kind of loosening up, but still, like, it was Monday morning after my week off, and I park in the players' parking lot, and I'm walking into the facility, and I have such a bad back spasm that I'm brought to my knees in the parking lot. And some of my teammates had to like literally walk me into the facility, brought me into the training room. They're like, what's going on? I'm like, my back just spasmed, completely
Wow.
gave out. I couldn't even walk. So it's starting to seem like something else is happening.
Yeah.
We go and do an MRI, nothing comes up. Keep going. Might have put me on another steroid pack. I don't know. Keep going. Still, like, nothing's really working. Get another MRI like a week or so later. Nothing again. But something's wrong. Something's off. Finally, get a third MRI. And this is basically now like a month since the Steelers incident. It's really early in the morning. I go and do this MRI, and after the MRI, they bring me back into this examination room, which they had never done before.
Hmm.
And they're being like really cryptic. And they're like, you need to wait here. The doctor's coming to talk to you. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know? Because our trainer was supposed to pick me up after the MRI. And I'm just like, what's going on? Finally, this doctor comes. Excuse Luna.
No, it's all good.
This doctor comes and he says, Eb, there's an infection in your disc.
God.
And I was like, okay, what does that mean? He says, well, we're going to have to admit you to the hospital. We're going to do some tests, and you'll be, I don't know if you'll ever be able to play football again. And I was like, dude, go
Jesus.
fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself, first of all. And I was like, I never want to see that. And this is like the back specialist of the team. And I was like, I never want to see that fucking guy ever again. And I didn't. They admitted me to the hospital. I'm in the hospital all weekend. They end up doing a biopsy on the disc, uh,
Ouch.
which is in there now. It takes they let me go from the hospital because the biopsy, yeah, they wanted to do a biopsy on me like that day.
Hmm.
And they're like, Eb, we can't give you any anesthesia because you've eaten. Uh, so we'd have to do the biopsy on you just awake and raw. I'm like, fuck that. I've been through enough. You're going to put me out for that thing.
Yeah.
So they're like, well, we have to, if we're going to do it, the anesthesia, the guy who does it is here today and he won't be back till Monday. So you'd have to just wait the whole weekend. I'm like, fine. I guess I'm here all weekend then. So I was in a hospital for the whole weekend. On Monday, they juice me up. I get the twilight. They take me down to do a biopsy, do the biopsy. I'm in there like another couple days and nothing's coming up. The biopsy is negative. They're like, Eb, I don't know what to say. The infectious disease guy is saying, it looks okay. It's not staph. It's not MRSA. It seems like I don't know what's going on, but nothing's coming up in this biopsy.
Wow.
So they send me home. And a few days after that, finally I get a call that they were going to throw out the culture and something had appeared. And so they call me in. They figure out that it was this super low virulent bacteria with a super low virulence. They eventually said that it was the same bacteria that causes acne had gotten in there.
Wow.
And I had to go on 8 weeks of intravenous antibiotics. So I was done for the season again. A nurse would come to my house every day and inject me with these antibiotics. I lost a ton of weight, but for a minute I was, I was dealing with lower body paralysis. I couldn't walk around my house for more than 2 minutes before my legs gave out. I had to like hold myself up on the sink to wash my
Mm.
hands. I was a mess, man. But still in my head, I'm like, I'll be fine. I'll work back from this. So that year, the year comes to an end, the team gets sold, the head coach gets fired, new team owner, they bring in a new head coach, come back, work my ass off, come back for my fourth year. Um, and it just like kind of the whole team fell apart.
Yeah.
I got benched halfway through the season in a year that, I mean, I needed like a year to recover to get my body back, and
Mhm.
I did the best I could, and I wasn't the player I had come into the league as in that
Mhm.
season. Um, and that was really finished that year in Jacksonville, finished up my contract there, and really felt like I might be done playing football.
Mhm.
I just lost that love I was talking about. I really lost it, and the
Yeah.
coaches and being benched was soul crushing for me because football had been my life. This community had been my family, the coaches, my father figures. Like I gave everything I had, and I got benched, and nobody could tell me why. Nobody would talk to me about it. No one, it was like I went from being the golden child to the exiled, invalid,
Mhm.
and it was completely, it destroyed me,
Mhm.
mentally, physically, spiritually. It completely destroyed me. I was ready to be done. Had a few conversations with some people that were very close to me, my wife, my dad, one of my teammates, Brad Meester, who ended up playing 14 years center for the Jags. And it was really Brad who said, Eb, give it one more shot, man. Give free agency a shot. Maybe you sign with a team and you find your love for the game again. Maybe go sign with another team and you realize that you really are done. And there you go. You have it. You have your answer. So I took his advice, had a workout with the Seahawks. They didn't sign me. Went and worked out with the Bears like the next day. They wanted to sign me right away. And then just took it kind of one day at a time, found my love for the game, had a really magical year, had great, great people. It was really fun to be a part of that organization, carved out a nice niche for myself as this sixth man swing tackle, also monster tight end. So I'd come in and play 20 to 30 snaps a game and really dominate. And I think it was either the Tribune or is it the Chicago Sun-Times?
Mhm.
One of those wrote a really big article about me when I came into the game, how the offense was 20 to 30% more productive.
Mhm.
And I felt like that was, sort of the year I needed to re-inspire me in my football life. So there was obvious, those were the major injuries. I
Mhm.
definitely suffered a handful of concussions,
Yeah.
torn muscles, all the typical stuff, rolled ankles, um, busted fingers, all that. My neck hurt just about every day.
Mhm.
But those were really the major injurious events that I dealt with during my football career.
And certainly some significant ones at that. And Evan, I'm just kind of curious because obviously you become an advocate for cannabis, and during your time in the NFL, were you predominantly using THC or were you also using CBD? Because I mean, there's the question of legalization we'll get to later, but I'm also curious what percentage of other NFL athletes are also using cannabis as sort of a substitute for opiates.
Mm. I'd say at least 50% of guys in the NFL are using cannabis.
Hmm.
One of my teammates in Chicago, Martellus Bennett, a good buddy of mine, when he came out of the league, he said that he thought 75% of guys were using cannabis,
Hmm.
um, which may be correct. Um, I used, this was 2009 to 2014, and I lived in Jacksonville, Florida, and Chicago, Illinois,
Yeah,
and I did not have access to all
but
of
yeah,
the
the
wonderful products. So I was buying a bag of weed.
hmm
I had a trusted dealer who I was spending way too much money and I'd get an ounce at a time and I would smoke it. I smoked it and eventually I got a vaporizer. Um, but I was just smoking cannabis and getting a lot of THC, maybe a little bit of CBD. Um, and I didn't even really at that time I was working mostly on intuition. I hadn't really dove into the science behind it. I knew how it made me feel. I knew that it just gave me something that the pills really couldn't. I felt rejuvenated and I felt like it healed my body and it blanketed the pain and it decompressed the stress that I was under on all levels, physically, emotionally. Um, and so it wasn't really so when I came out of my football career and I very organically fell into cannabis advocacy. I wrote an article for SI.com and I talk about dealing with injuries, the pill protocols that are very common. I mean, 98% of guys in an NFL locker room are on some sort of pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory regimen daily,
Of course, yeah.
whether that's Cataflam, Indocin, Advil, you're just taking it just to sustain, just to deal with all the nicks and the bumps and the bruises that you're dealing with on a daily basis. Um, that's not even talking about the opiates that come in as you get older and as the season goes on. Every guy is taking these pills all the time, every single day. Now, opiates, most guys aren't taking opiates every day, but you're probably taking them once or twice a week,
Yeah.
before games, after games, whatever it might be, on top of the anti-inflammatories. And these things just wreak havoc on your digestive system, on your liver and kidneys. And I mean, there's tons of stories of very young guys, mid to late 30s, dealing with liver and kidney failure, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so I wrote an article talking a lot about that. I talked a little bit about my use of cannabis and how I felt like it helped me during my football career dealing with injuries and in my transition out of football. And somewhere along the line, I had always been, it had kind of been part of locker room conversation about why is cannabis illegal?
Yeah.
It's so much better for you than X, Y, and Z. It's the only thing, I had conversations with many guys during my career of it's the only thing I use after games that I feel like makes me feel better.
Yeah.
So those conversations were definitely happening. I remember from the time I was even at Arizona in college, seeing my good friend who was one of my heroes growing up, this guy, Kyle Turley, who was doing interviews on ESPN on Outside the Lines with Bob Lee, talking about how cannabis needed to be allowed for NFL players dealing with concussions and how it was really the only medicine that football players should be using, to
Mhm.
deal with the issues that we're all experiencing during football. So I had that, and then after my career, I write this article, and my agent reaches out to me and says, "Hey, man, Kyle Turley wants to connect with you. I think you guys would have a lot to talk about. Is it cool if I introduce you?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, dude. That's my
Mhm.
childhood hero, like the prototype of who I wanted to be as a young offensive lineman." Um, so I get connected with Kyle. Kyle says, "Eb, I'm putting on a cannabis and sports panel in Phoenix at this cannabis conference next month. I would love for you to be there. Come speak, tell your story, and I'd love for you to check out this group, this community that I'm putting together." I said, "Yeah, man, sure, I'd love to." And at that time, I wasn't really sure. I've always been a truth teller. I've always been, they used to tell me and the PR people in the locker room, like, "Eb, you're so good in interviews because you're so honest." And so this has always kind of been my thing, and it's
Hmm.
transcended out of my football career. So I was like, yeah, I'd love to come tell my story. I don't know exactly what purpose it'll serve at this stage. I'm still a little bit ashamed talking about my cannabis use because I was always a team leader and a team captain and the guy that coaches look to set the example for everyone else. So I kept my cannabis use super private.
Hmm.
Aside from, the little group of guys that we'd go and smoke together, like after practice or after games or whatever it was. So I was very wary of talking about it and being open about it, but I thought, hey man, this is where the universe is leading me. So, I don't have anything else going on. And in a time when I was really desperate to reimagine myself in life after football, I took it as a sign from the universe. Hey, let's go meet Kyle and speak on this panel. So I fly to Phoenix. Um, There I meet Nate Jackson, who's another former NFL player, played tight end for the Broncos for 6 years, was a New York Times bestselling author, had been doing this cannabis speaking on like Deadspin and some stuff with Vice. And then Ricky Williams, who of course is sort of
Yeah.
he's the guy when you think of cannabis and football,
Mm.
and his whole story. And I always admired Ricky, and I really admired Nate because I'd come across his work too, sort of just cosmically. So it's Kyle Turley, myself, Nate Jackson, Ricky Williams, and we go into this conference hall. Fast forward, go into this conference hall to speak on this panel of cannabis and football. And it's like 5 to 700 people in this conference hall, massive. And I'm kind of awestruck and blown away. And I finished telling my story about how I used cannabis during my football career. And I feel like it really helped me deal with injuries. And it was a much better alternative to opiates. And I feel like I'm better for it coming out of my football career than had I not used it. And I finished telling my story. And I'm looking around this room, and there's cancer survivors and military veterans and these families, mothers with children who suffer these severe seizure syndromes like Dravet's, where they've gone from having 1,000 seizures a week to 1 or 2 seizures a month thanks to
Yeah.
cannabis oils. And I'm just kind of, my mind is blown at the scope of people who this plant has had a positive effect on. And this is all starting to coagulate in me like, wow, how important it is that NFL guys are willing to speak about the medicinal benefits of cannabis, given the platform that we have had and the exposure that we've had to speak on this plant as medicine, and how it's validating these stories for all of these people and giving credibility to this thing that really, it's like it's ridiculous that NFL players, are the ones giving validity to something that's ancient and so important to the existence of humankind.
Hmm.
But this is all starting to come together. And then Kyle Turley starts talking, and he opens it up with, the federal government has a patent on cannabinoids as neuroprotectants and antioxidants, patent 6,630,507. And it's literally like my mind is completely blown. My entire experience as an athlete is crystallized in this moment and validated and legitimized. And my intuition for all these years that was so wrapped in shame and sort of darkness because I was using this thing that I had perceived as illegal, that
Hmm.
I had perceived as this street drug, but I was using it intuitively to heal the pain that I was experiencing. Now I'm finding out that the federal government, the same institution that has criminalized this plant and made it illegal and classified it as a Schedule 1 narcotic, which means it has no medicinal benefits whatsoever and you can't study it, they have a patent on this thing as neuroprotectants and antioxidants, which means they've seen in some fashion through some sort of studies and research that the chemical compounds found in this plant actually help the brain heal from damage and can protect the brain from damage before it occurs. And I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
What is going on? And then he goes on to say that every living creature on this planet has an endocannabinoid system, a
Hmm.
system in our body that interacts with the chemical compounds found in the cannabis plant. And we ourselves produce our own cannabinoids to facilitate all of these processes like our mood, our sleep rhythms, our appetite, and how we feel and deal with pain, among other things.
Hmm.
And it just lit this fire of passion, of knowledge seeking. From that moment, I thought, I need to learn everything I can about the science of this plant and the history of it, because this is so much more important than I ever realized. Um, and that was really the beginning of this journey in my life after the NFL. Um, and it's been a wild ride, man, and it's been really interesting to see the evolution of this conversation from that point, because that was in 2015,
Yeah.
and this topic was still, I did tons of interviews and I was still being met with confusion
A lot of
and,
resistance, I imagine.
yeah, tons of resistance. People are like, what the fuck are you talking about? I felt like I had really alienated myself from my whole football community, from high school coaches all the way through to the NFL. Um, but something in me was like, this is truth, man. Like, this is so, the more I learned, the more validated I was in the truth of this thing. And I just thought to myself, if I do nothing else, just speaking on my experience with this plant to illuminate the truth around what it is and how it benefits us as human beings,
Hmm.
that's my purpose right now, you know? And that led me to pretty much everything I'm doing now. And all of that sort of underlying shame and inner turmoil around it, that inner conflict around, upsetting high school coaches and upsetting all these people, that's all been remedied over the last few years when all of these guys have started reaching out to me going, Eb, thank you so much for doing what you're doing. It's so
Yeah.
true. We've known this. Like, I've experienced this myself. It's been so beneficial. You opened my eyes to this thing, et cetera, et cetera. And that's been really incredible, to experience all of that.
Eben, there's a number of other topics I want to go down with you and sort of go down a number of different wormholes on. We haven't even gone into spirituality and plant medicine and those things, but we may have to just in the interest of time, and I don't want to take too much more of yours, to save that for a round two. But maybe just perhaps a wrap up question, because this has been a beautiful conversation, and I'm really excited that you're out there really pounding the pavement on this one, because though I wasn't in the NFL, I was in finance, and there's certainly a lot of people using a lot of substances there. But I think there's
Yeah.
this dogma that exists around cannabis and exists around plant medicines that needs to be removed, because the
Mm,
fact is it's probably safer than the predominant drug of use in finance, which is alcohol.
mm,
Uh, and, I guess to wrap this up, one last question for you is, what excites you the most about the cannabis world right now?
mm. I would say the deconstruction of the old paradigm, that's crumbling, not only in the psyche and consciousness of the collective human organism, but even in our government bodies, and whether that's states, the country, America in particular, um, and the world. I think that since starting on this journey, and it's been really an honor to stand with these people and to meet these people who are so inspiring, empowering, standing in their truth, speaking their experience into the world to make it a better place, to expand the understanding around these things. Um, you know, there's a long way to go. I think I always, it's, we've seen a lot of news. I think federally they've decriminalized cannabis, or they've legalized cannabis to some extent on a federal level now in the US. I don't, and I know that's all like kind of bureaucratic, and there's a lot of ins and outs to that are involved in that. But um, what was it? It was the MORE Act that just went through, and they passed it. And so these are huge milestones in this issue. This is a more than 10,000-year-old plant that has been benefiting mankind since the inception of our relationship with it. And it really wasn't until the last 70 years, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, that cannabis even became illegal to grow and distribute and sell and consume in America. And that was put forth by Harry Anslinger, William Randolph Hearst, and Carnegie Mellon, Andrew Carnegie Mellon. I think that's his name. But it was basically, Harry Anslinger wanted more control. William Randolph Hearst, the hemp was infringing upon his paper empire.
Hmm.
Carnegie Mellon, hemp was infringing on their steel empire.
Hmm.
Henry Ford had just made a car made out of hemp fibers that was more durable, stronger, um, better, lighter than making it out of steel parts. And these guys were really threatened in their business enterprises. And so they set out to demonize and make the cannabis plant illegal. I mean, cannabis, hemp. Our country was founded on it. Farmers of the original American colonies were mandated to grow hemp to pay Great Britain in taxes with,
Hmm.
because the most powerful military operation on the planet at that time, the British Navy, used hemp for just about everything they did.
Yep.
It was their most valued material and resource. So, you know, when you start to learn about the history of this thing, the science behind it, it really, you start to, you start to go, what? We've been totally lied to. We've been totally manipulated. There's been all sorts of bureaucratic walls put up around this thing. For what purpose? And really, what else are we being lied to about? I
Hmm.
mean, to me, to step a little bit into the plant medicine world, I look at plant medicine as being part of a pyramid, and cannabis is really the foundational plant
Yeah.
medicine, and cannabis. I think even Joe Biden recently said that he believed cannabis was a gateway drug. That's, a fucking, and in
It's a
some
little bit,
respects,
yeah, it's a little bit outdated.
cannabis is a gateway into fucking healing, health, and well-being.
Yeah.
And it's really, the fundamental herb. It's a fundamental herb in Chinese medicine.
Hmm.
I mean, going back even farther than that, there's some really incredible mythology, not even mythology, but just history around the cannabis plant with the Dogon tribe of West Africa. I
Hmm.
don't know if you're familiar, but the Dogon tribe has a annual cannabis celebration, and they celebrate cannabis because it's in their origin as a people, that the beings from the Sirius stars came down visited the Dogon tribe and brought them the cannabis plant and said, this
Mm,
plant will bring you peace and it'll bring you, health and well-being. And you can use this plant to do basically whatever you need.
yeah.
And they have all of these cave drawings that depict this stuff. And before we even had the telescopes to see that there were Sirius stars, they had drawn them out perfectly in the constellations in these cave drawings. And this famous French explorer discovered all this. And it's really fascinating stuff, to think about the fact that cannabis has really been the peace bringing plant forever. And no matter what the government tries to do or how we try to demonize it or stigmatize it, it continues to emerge as this remedy for human ills. So, I'm a big fan of it. I'm super passionate about spreading the truth of this plant and doing whatever I can to open people's minds up. It's been interesting, with my family members who never would have considered cannabis as a therapeutic option, and they're calling me up asking me about what would I recommend to help them get sleep or to help them deal with back pain or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
And that's really, that's huge.
That's great.
That's huge. And we can all do that. We can all do that with our family,
Hmm.
because talking about these types of issues at the dinner table, it opens people's minds up to the validity of these plants as medicine.
Yeah, amazing. Eben, look, I'm gonna have you back for a round two sometime when we can find a time that works.
Definitely.
This has been an absolute pleasure. Where can people find out more about you?
You can check out my website, ebenbritton.com. That's sort of my hub. You can even reach out to me there. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at EDSBritton. I'm also on Patreon. If you're down for everything I'm doing, love to have you there. Love to have you support. That's patreon.com/EDS Britain. And then check out my podcast, The Ebb and Flow, available on all podcast platforms. And I'm on YouTube. I've just started cranking out some more video content, and you can check me out there as well. And Boomer, I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
We're gonna link to all this in the show notes. Eben, it's been an absolute pleasure. And everybody listening, look, this is just the beginning of many conversations. So thank you for coming on the show today, Eben.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
To all the superhumans listening out there, have an absolutely epic day.